Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar on creating a production and lighting design to take advantage of show limitations and challenges presented by Tess Falcone. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit questions to the presenter and they'll try to answer as many questions as possible at the end. This webinar is also being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after the presentation. We do have a number of other webinars taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series on pro.harman.com, as well as visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are always available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Tess Falcone, the presenter for today's webinar. Tess is a freelance lighting and production designer from Denver, Colorado. Since beginning her career with theater work in college, she's gained experience with many different types of shows and music, including touring for the past 9 years with acts like Jimmy Eats World, Weezer, and Ben Folds. And now I'll pass it over to you, Tess.
Thanks, Laura. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me on my webinar. I'd like to start off by giving you a little bit more information about myself. Laura did a great job of starting it off, but I just wanted to give you a little note about how I actually came into the industry. So I did a little bit of theater lighting in college. I was a biology major, and when I graduated, I tried to go into biology for a little bit and decided that that was not for me, but I was also going to a lot of shows at the same time, and I was noticing that I was staring up at the lighting a lot. So I made friends with a touring lighting designer and kept in contact with him over the years, and he helped me to get onto my first tour. And then I ended up making friends with some bands that were coming in through a venue in Colorado, and I asked them if they would take me on the road, and they did, and the rest is history. So today we're going to talk about a lot of the challenges that I've faced, and more specifically a lot of challenges that my friends have faced. So I'll start by giving you a couple of the challenges that I faced over the last couple of years in designing some big shows. So I'll start with this Weezer design. This was a co-design with my partner, Dan Hadley. And as you can see, this is all one show, and so there was a lot going on it. The show started out, or the design started out with a conversation with the artist where he wanted a crazy beach design that also was a space design. And so I worked for a lot of months on a drawing for that, and then maybe 3 months after that, he changed his mind and decided that he wanted to do these 3 specific scenes. So as you can see up here, this is the first, or sorry, this bottom one over here in the blue is the first scene that we did, and that was the Arnold's Diner from Happy Days. That was a part of one of their music videos from the 90s. Then this top one is In the Garage, which is one of their songs, and also a music video look. And then they also wanted this big rock show look. And the easy option would have been just, okay, well, video, we can easily change the scenes in that. But their last tour had been heavily video, and so I kind of wanted to go in a different direction and avoid that side of it. So Dan and I came up with these periactoi. This was a theatrical thing that is a 3-sided theater flat. So we automated those periactoi and raised them up and then rotated them when it was time to change over the scenes. And I think it was really successful. We had a lot of scenic work, and we had a really awesome crew that helped us change those scenes in the middle of the show during songs. And then there was a moment where the lead singer went out into the audience, and he came back into this big rock show, which is this last look over on the left here. So this was a lot of challenges combined into one. So it was a lot of time constraints because when he made the decision to change it, we were a little bit short on time. It was also just having everything built out by a scenic company, and it was a lot of work, but it was also the biggest show that I had ever designed, and so I really wanted to do a good job of it, and I think that was a successful challenge. This is another challenging show that I designed, and this is Sophia Tucker, which I designed for in 2018. And the biggest issue with this design was that I broke my arm about a week before I was supposed to go out on this show. So it was already a bit of a last-minute design, and I was putting together stuff and getting feedback from the artist and from the production manager and the management. And then I got in a bicycling accident and broke my arm, which I thought at the time was unique, but my friend Lauren Seago has now also broken her arm right before she was supposed to go out with Sophia Tucker. So apparently not so unique. But it was definitely a challenge. We did not have a technician out on the road with us for these shows, and I was supposed to be taking the show out for the first week and a half or two, and then having someone else come in and operate the show for the rest of the tour. But since we didn't have a technician, I was supposed to be setting up everything every day, and so I was carrying a lot of feeder one-handed and putting up truss towers. And fortunately, I was lucky enough to have some really good local crews that helped out at production rehearsals and also at all of our shows while I was out on the road. So that was a very, very challenging show. So for the rest of our time today, I have created a wheel, and I have asked a lot of my friends to give me some good challenges that they have come across when they have been designing for artists, for concerts primarily. And so each of these wedges on here correlates to a challenge, and so I will spin it, and I will go through that challenge, and I will show you some photographs from it. And then once that challenge has been taken over, I have these cute little fun facts that I will put onto that number, so if it is spun again, then I will just give you a lighting fun fact. So let's begin. All right, so our first challenge is challenge number 8, and I think probably the trickiest part of this is going to be just scrubbing through and finding my challenges, so please bear with me on that. So challenge number 8 comes from my friend Gabby Sheff, and the challenge is, how do you deal with an artist who has extreme stage fright and doesn't want to see the audience at all? So it's an artist's emotional limitations. She does not want any, or the artist, excuse me, does not want any lights to be on the audience so that she does not think that they exist, so that she can perform without having any of that weight on her. So this can be really tricky, but also the best way I have found to think about this is in theatrical terms. And I know that I come from a theatrical background, but this is a very good instance for that. So if you think about it, in a theater, very infrequently do you see the audience. So I believe that if you are giving it a more theatrical look, you are using more scenery, you're lighting up drapes, you are lighting up scenic elements, then you would be able to achieve this really easily. Other options for this is just to keep the plane of the proscenium your working space. So if you can do vertical lighting, or if the show could have lasers, you could do some vertical lasers or hanging drapes, those kinds of things, and you can really make your artist feel comfortable. And I think that's the most important thing on something like this. This is a really personal issue for the artist, and I'm sure that it can be really challenging for them to go from writing those songs in their basement or whatever and into this audience that adores them, but also just looking at those, you don't want to disappoint them. So you have to be really understanding of the artist's limitations here. And I think your biggest thing that you want to work on is helping your artist to trust you, and so that you can create this beautiful show together that does not give them any issues. That's challenge number 8. Moving on. Challenge number 10. All right. And let's go to start on this one. So this comes from, I paraphrased a challenge from Ben Marks, and his question is, how do you know where to start when you're learning new software? And this is very pertinent right now because I know a lot of you are out there spending your time working on new software and watching loads of YouTube videos, and I'm doing the same thing. I've been learning After Effects in my spare time, and so I know this very, very well right now. it can be a little bit challenging with programs that are not as well traveled, I'll say. So Vectorworks is sort of a bit of a niche market, and I know that we all work with it, we all love it, and we all hate it. We'll love to hate it, but it is a bit of a niche market in the fact that it is not as widely used as Adobe. So Adobe, you can find a million tutorials on the internet for those specific things, but with Vectorworks it can be a little bit more challenging. So one of the things that I have found is really important is to start with the basics tutorials that the program gives you, because a lot of the time they do understand that you don't know where to start and you have no idea where to begin. And so if you do the basics tutorial, that'll at least give you an idea of the program's workflow, and then you can move on to some projects that you need to do. So I personally had started out learning Vectorworks on my own by creating projects or lighting plots for some venues that I had worked in town. So I already knew what it was supposed to look like, but I had to work on the tools and figuring out where they actually, where they fit in and how to make what I knew that I wanted to do actually happen on paper. So it's really important to keep things achievable. And so if you're creating small projects, that will make it so that you actually feel like you can achieve those goals and then move on to something more challenging. So a good example from my world is this drawing that was the very first plot that I ever made for the band Weezer when I was working for them. And it's very basic, and it was about, this accurately describes describes my Vectorworks skills at the time. So this was in 2017, and I was just proud to have gotten a very readable and somewhat custom with my business card on the side drawing that I could give to people, and it was just a festival drawing because that was the only thing that we were doing at the time. But I was very happy with this at the time. And then go forward about a year and a half, and this is the drawings that I had created for that show that I had shown you earlier, and we had to create all three of those scenes. So it was figuring out how to represent these to management and to the artist ahead of time so that they would want to do our project. And it was a lot of figuring out how to make things move and how to make things rotate. So how do you want to create those periactoids? Do you just want to have a plane that has all of that scenic on it, or do you actually make them spin in place? And so we ended up working on actually creating them physically in that program and then rotating them, and it was very, very challenging. And I have come a very, very long way since that first drawing. But I also, one of the main things that I do with new software is I make good friends with people who do know the software already. And so I think that when you are learning a new program, it can be really daunting. But if you have someone who is learning the program at the same time, you can talk to each other about those things that you've learned. And as much as it is like taking from that other person and whatever they learned, it can be really fun to explain to them also, oh my gosh, I just found this one thing that completely changes your workflow, and then they get excited about it and they've learned something now too. So that is make friends, be nice to people. We are all here for the greater good. This is a scene from one of my favorite movies, Hot Fuzz, and it's an ongoing joke with some of my friends that we are all here for the greater good. We are all here trying to make ourselves better lighting designers, and we can help each other become that. All right, moving on. Ooh, too close to call, too close to call. All right, challenge number 2. All right, so challenge number 2 is a very common challenge that we've all come across if you've done rock shows, and that is stage size. So this comes from Megan Metcalf, who was doing a tour that started out as an arena support tour and then moved into a headlining club tour and then moved into festival shows and smaller rigs and all of these changes. And she knew this coming in, which was helpful. but it can be very challenging to scale your project. So something that can be very useful in this is to do your homework, and I'm probably going to say this a lot on this webinar, but do your homework. If you can look at all of the venues that you're going to have on the tour and find the smallest one and the largest one and see what you were going to do for those two shows, then you can kind of average out everything else that you're going to do for the rest of the tour. So these pictures that I have up on screen right now are from Jimmy Eat World, and this was a design that my partner and I did in 2019, last summer, for an outdoor amphitheater show. And we initially had thought that it was a co-headliner, so we would have the full stage, but we found out later that it was actually a direct support slot, and so we had about 14 space of depth for our show to come in, and so we had a very quick changeover, and we had to deal with all of those things on their own. But we also needed to use our space the best, and we ended up. One of the other things, there are other challenges with this show was that almost the entire overhead rig was behind our backdrop for the headlining band, and so we had to figure out a way to utilize some of that, and while having a fully contained show with our own gear. And so something that we came up with was a somewhat translucent background. So the letters Jimmy Eat World are translucent, and we could shine gobos through them, and it was really, really neat. But we moved this show over in the fall over to smaller clubs, and it was my task to scale it back down without having to completely reprogram the show. So we used the same fixture types, but had to make it shrinkable. So something that we found was really, really helpful in our design, but also I found in the scaling of our show was Steptrons are amazing for this, because you can, the video maps do not care where your video is. They don't care where your Steptrons are. They don't care how well they're spaced. They will still create that. And so since the Steptrons were such a heavy portion of our summer show, I didn't want to completely lose that programming, because it was a large portion of my programming as well. So we figured out that I could use those on horizontal pipes instead, so that I could move those Steptrons in tighter if I needed to, or we actually brought up vertical pipes as well. So for the one small show that we ended up doing, I put the Steptrons horizontally on the pipes, and I still had the video element, but I didn't have that much space with the stage, so it was helpful. This is one of the harder days on that same tour that we had, but you can still see I was able to still use about 2/3 of the lighting rig, including that video element, and it was a terrible day. We had the monitor world was right next to the band, all of the backline was right next to them, and there was a staircase upstage right, there was a ramp down upstage left, so it was very, very tight squeeze, but I ended up making that fit with that same design, and it still worked out pretty nicely. So important things with that is to make sure that you have done that homework and seen all of your venues, but also do the prep work with that in mind. So when you're building cable looms and that kind of a thing, make sure that you can reach your largest venue, but also your smallest venue as well. The exact opposite can be true also with festivals. It can be really challenging if you're going from a headlining club tour to a festival stage that is giant. A lot of the time your band is not going to want to take up that space with themselves, because they don't feel as tight-knit as a band. They don't feel each other's vibe on stage. So it can be up to the designer to figure out how to make the stage actually filled so it doesn't look like big stage, band. So something that you can do is, if it's easier, of course, if you're headlining the show, so that you can ask the vendors for the festival to bring in fixtures that are similar to your own rig that you are carrying, so that you can clone over things pretty easily. But also, if there's a budget to bring in a few more floor fixtures to fill in that space, you can try to multiply those fixtures that you have on the floor, so that you don't actually have to do more programming for those. You can just clone in that same thing, and it can be really, really helpful for filling that space, and it can make you look like you have a much larger show than you originally had. Yeah. All right, challenge number 4. Color limitations from the artist. So a lot of us have worked with bands who hate the color white on them. It can be from their times in small clubs where they had really, really harsh white light on them, or they were in that same setting but were seeing photographs of themselves. They were seeing those lights, they just hate it, and they refuse to let their first designers use the color white. And that can be really, really challenging if you are used to using that color to do, accents and pops and things like that. Of course, there are other situations where the artist just wants a specific color palette. So I know that Jack White is very famous for doing a specific color palette for his shows. So that is a completely separate thing on its own. But a lot of this just comes down to talking to the artist and having a good rapport with the artist and management so that you can talk through these issues and find out where that aversion came from in the first place, and also make them trust you. Again, I know that it can be challenging if you are the first lighting designer that a band has had and they've only seen club operators that don't care as much about them, that don't know their music as well. And so it's really just getting down to the heart of that and figuring out, okay, is this something that we can get around? Or is it something that you can get around after a tour? So say you do a full tour and the color, your show is great, you didn't use that color that they don't want you to use, but the artist at that point might trust you a little bit more than before. So maybe you can talk about that and figure out if that's something that you can go forward with, or if it's something that, yeah, I trust you, but also I never want to see that color again. That's totally fine. Artists can be picky. We don't really know the reasons sometimes. That's okay. It's our job to make those shows still as good. So trying to figure out a different way that you would use that color, but with other attributes. So something that I frequently like to do is a gobo pop. So from a gobo, out of a gobo, so that you have a heavier intensity going on, or from one gobo to another so that you have a very visible change, can be really effective in that kind of a situation. Also, just if you can do an intensity chase or something that can just bring out those pops a little bit more when you would normally use that color, can be really helpful. One of my favorite stories about having a color limitation is when I was working for Ben Folds. A few years ago, we did a show with a symphony, and for those of you who have not dealt with a symphony at any point, it is so challenging and it is so fun because the symphony is not used to having lights at all. They are used to a very static scene. They are used to warm white lights. They can see their music. That they are the target for that. They are the only thing the focal point for that show. They do not care about lighting at all. And so when you come in as a designer into that setting, it can be really challenging. And this specific one had a really, really nice lighting rig in it. And so I was playing with it. I always like to be really cognizant of the symphony members so that they don't think that I don't care about them. And I want them to have a good show as well. But I also, I know that they have dealt with this in the past a little bit, and they have stand lights and things that can help them through those shows. So about halfway through the day, I had one of the venue people come up to me and say, well, the bassoon player can't see his music if you're using magenta. Magenta? Just magenta? That's what he said. Okay. What about red? Not sure. Let me ask him. So she leaves. She comes back. She says, he doesn't really like red either. So what can you do about that? Oh, what about amber? Do I need to skip the entire warm side of the spectrum? Yeah, you might as well just skip the entire that entire side of the spectrum. And I didn't know what to do. I was so bummed out to be losing half of my colors. It can't be an entire, I mean, it could be an entirely blue, green, purple, white show, but I really like it not to be. What are we going to do? And so we looked up into, my crew and I looked up into the ceiling, and there were a handful of Lecos that we had not yet used. And I ended up focusing 4 Lecos with tight shutter cuts just on his music so that he could see his music very, very well. And so we did sound check and everything. And the guy did not say a word, and I was just rolling through colors the entire day, just having a good time. And he didn't care because he could actually see his music just from giving him a little bit more light on that stand. So, you know, sometimes you just have to be creative and not listen to what they say, even though, you know, you should technically listen to what they say. Yeah. All right, lighting fun fact. Woo! Okay, so first lighting fun fact of the day. Since we are sponsored by Martin Professional today, we'll give you a Martin Professional lighting fun fact. This is from our sweet Brad Schiller here. Martin Professional was started after Peter Johansson made a smoke machine out of a coffee maker in 1978. Very interesting. All right, challenge number 3. This is one of my favorite ones. I believe it is right there. All right, so what do you do without Haze? I know a lot of us are used to having Haze for all of our shows forever, and it can make things so nice and so beautiful. So what do you do when you don't have it? Say your artist doesn't like it. Say your artist had a bad experience with it and just will not allow it. Say your artist doesn't trust you yet. These are all things that can happen. It happens very frequently in my life for some reason. I have a lot of artists that do not like Haze. It mostly comes down to figuring out what surfaces you can texture with lights. So this bottom photograph, it was my first experience with no Haze, and this was a design by my friend Brock Hogan for the artist Matt Nathanson. And I think Brock did a really nice job here of creating some really good textures. He had this aluminum scrim on the back wall that is separated by video panels, and then also some rolling carts that had video as well with a scrim, the aluminum scrim in front of it so that he could light that up as well. So it was just giving him a lot more options. This tour specifically was also an amphitheater tour, so a lot of the audience was looking down on the stage, so you could also paint the stage really well and have some really nice looks with gobos or just changes in color. So these are really, really important aspects of that world. So if you can actually create as dynamic of a show as you would with Haze. One of the other things that he had done in that show was to select fixtures that have different faces on them. So whether it was LED washes or the psych lights, you could have some lights that looked out into the audience so that the audience could see fun little chases over the pixels or stuff like that. The important thing to remember when you're doing a lot of that and trying to have the lights facing out into the audience is that they will easily get fatigued of staring into lights all day, especially LEDs that can be really piercing into their eyeballs. So you have to be really cognizant of that when you are doing a show like that. This top photograph is from a Ben Folds show, a different one that we did with the symphony, and this shows up one of my favorite things that I do with Ben. And I know that this is nothing revolutionary, but I love using a cyclorama for Ben's shows. A lot of the time, his aversion to Haze is more based on the fact that it's just him and a piano for most of his shows, and he doesn't want a big rock show. He doesn't want to have plumes of smoke coming out. He doesn't want big movements. He wants it to be more contained. And so having a cyclorama in the back with colors on it can be really, really helpful for still creating a big show, but sort of in a more classy way, like a classical pianist. And it has been really successful also because you can see it reflects really well off the piano, which can be a blessing or a curse depending on the day. So one of my favorite stories about having no Haze was also with Ben Folds, and it came this last year when I had been working for him for about 3 years at this point. He came up to me backstage one day and said, Tess, I trust you at this point. We've worked together for a long time now, and so I really trust what you're doing. So if there's anything more interesting than you're looking to do, if you want to do anything that's a little bit jazzed up, please feel free to do that. And so immediately I said, how do you feel about Haze? And he laughed about it a little bit and said, you can use Haze, but I have been known to write songs about seeing, or make up songs on the spot about seeing big plumes of smoke on stage. So if you do, and I see that plume of smoke, there's a chance you'll have a song written about you. And that was all I needed to hear, so I have never tried to use Haze with him again. All right, challenge number 7. Okay, so this challenge comes to me from my friend Chris Brupel, and his challenge is, when you're touring without a flown rig, what do you do about that inevitable day that you have an entirely conventional rig? So there are a lot of different scenarios here that you could deal with, and the first one that I'd like to talk about is if you are carrying a ground-supported lighting rig on your tour for yourself. So a lot of the time, if that is the case, I personally really like to have a self-contained show in that floor package so that if I have those days, I don't have to rely too heavily on those par cans. And then I know that when I do have those days, I can either, if I have the time, I can build them into cues, or I can busk that part of it and still run the rest of my show cue to cue, which can be really helpful. But like we did on those Ben Folds tours, we didn't carry any lighting, and so it was really important for me to actually take the time to create a lighting plot that had all of the circuiting and all of the colors for those shows. And I will say that I'm a little bit on the younger side, and so I did not spend a lot of time in my earlier years of lighting working with fully conventional rigs, and so it's a bit new to me to try different things. In the past, I would always do, very symmetrical focuses and colors and everything like that, and circuiting. And so this year I actually branched out a little bit and tried doing some asymmetrical circuiting. So you can see I did a few different colors here and there so that I could, just try to do something different, because it was, a lot of those days are going to be boring in the sense of a light show. They're not going to be as fun for us, but I decided to make it as fun as I possibly could and give myself a little bit of a challenge. But on these days, one of the things that I have found is really, really helpful is having a focus sheet. So I have a handwritten focus sheet that tells me where all of my positions are for all of these lights, and probably not for every single 120 of these par cans, but at least for all of the LECO positions, and which was really helpful for this tour because it was 2 separate bands that were co-headlining, so they each had to have an equally cool light show, even though they were using the exact same gear. So that was a big challenge as well, but it made the days a lot quicker if I knew where those focuses were, so I didn't have to keep my riggers or my electricians in the air longer than they needed to, because a lot of these are summer tours, they're hot, those people don't want to be up there sweating on you for the entire morning or afternoon or whatever. Something else that I spent a lot of time doing on these days was bounce focusing, so bringing the rig in and focusing everything as best as I could, so then that rigger or that climber could just and go through the entire thing in a pretty quick amount of time. So those notes were really, really important. I also have started, and this was a thing that my friend Brock Hogan taught me as well, I have started creating a specific layer in my patch. So this is obviously MA2, and I have a patch layer for the upstage dimmers as well as the downstage dimmers, and that helps me keep track of par cans throughout a tour. So especially if I know that I am going to have a lot of par cans on the tour, this way I have 10 fixtures for each color that I am asking for, and then I can just unpack them after that show, and all of the cues that I did, all of the faders that I created for that, or the executor buttons that I created for that, that all stays in there, so that the next day I just take the new patch sheet and plug in those conventional fixtures, and it saves myself a lot of time. Initially it takes a minute to set up, and especially if you're putting those into your cue to cue show, but eventually it saves you a lot of time. Something else that is challenging with touring without a flown rig when you're on these conventional days is also just not having the fixtures that you want and being sad about that. And so something that I have found is really helpful, and again, I'm going to say do your homework, is when you have talked to your promoters ahead of time, or the vendors who are providing for that day. So something that we ran into on these tours a lot was that they did not have enough LECOs to hit all of my band positions because there were so many. But because they were already bringing some LECOs for us, a lot of the vendors were very, very kind about saying, okay, well, you asked for this 2 weeks in advance, this is fine. It's like it barely touches the budget, so the promoter doesn't care. They're not losing money on it. And we even had a handful of days where if we talked to them, we could ahead of time, they'd say, well, I have some movers that aren't being used that day, so we'll just throw on a handful of movers for you too. So it can be really helpful to be nice as well. They will be much more willing to bend over backwards to help you have a successful show. Right, lighting fun fact. Lighting fun fact number 2. Did you know that the term LECO comes from LECO light, which was named after Joseph Levy and Edward Cook, the founders of Century Lighting, which later became Strand Lighting. All right, challenge number 6. Ooh, this is a related question. So this is also from my friend Chris Ruppel. It also has to deal with touring without a flown rig. So he asks, how do you keep track of your necessary overhead fixtures? This can be really hard to deal with sometimes when you have a lot of venues that have really unreliable rigs. And I'll say that's one of the most important things to take into consideration. So when you are doing your homework and learning about all of your venues, you need to figure out what the level of reliability is for your overall lighting rig that the house will be providing to you. So if you can rely on having a handful of movers, then you can do some programming for those movers and have that pretty much every day or almost every day. But if you don't have reliable house fixtures, then maybe you want to be more self-contained within your own ground-supported rig. So whether that means you are taking truss towers that have somewhat more elevated fixtures, or even if you are bringing in fixtures to hang on a local truss. This is actually something that is a really easy thing to do that a lot of the clubs will be very willing to help with, is if you don't have that structure, then you can just say, okay, ahead of time, when you're doing your homework, when you're talking to your venues, you can say, I have 4 fixtures that I want to hang on your upstage truss, or I have 6 fixtures on the downstage that I need just to fill in a little bit here and there, and you have all of the power built into your own system, you have looms already built. A lot of the time, the venue will be really willing to help with that kind of situation. And of course, there will be days when you're in a small club that has a crazy high trim height and the trusses don't move and the ladder is only half as tall as the trusses, and you won't be able to do that. But again, if you're doing your homework, if you are talking to the venues ahead of time, venues know their challenges better than you ever will. And so they were usually willing to say, okay, we've done this before, but it has been an issue, or this is really easy for us to do. We've got you covered, no big deal. This also comes into when you do actually have a reliable, a consistently reliable house rig on a tour. I think when you're programming, it can be really important to keep things simple with those fixtures overhead. So if it's a key light on a band member, that's easy. You can just, if you don't even have to do anything crazy with that, but keep it simple. So if you have a crazy animation wheel thing that you want to do, you're not necessarily going to have that every day, but you can do, like I said, a nice little go-go flip or even color changes. Just make sure that you're doing that homework and figuring that out ahead of time. I also, when going back to my focus list, I also keep a checklist every day when I'm on a tour like that of things that I need to hit in my programming. So I keep everything in presets because it makes my life a whole lot easier when I am doing effects that are preset-based. I can just update that preset and say, okay, well, I was going from Gobo 1 to Gobo 2, but now that Gobo is doing a crazy shake and I don't want it to, so we'll just update that preset, and that will update all of the effects. So then I keep that checklist of, okay, I need to check all Gobos. I usually check all Gobos anyway because the Gobo shake has killed me so many times, and that is the one thing that I don't want to have happen in the middle of a ballad, or you have in the middle of a ballad, you have a really, really fast prism spin because your last venue had the prism values inverted from what yours is today. So things like prisms and gobo spins and gobos just in general, I check those every day, but also focus positions or very specific colors if you need those. So yeah, keeping it simple and programming everything in presets can be really, really helpful in keeping those overhead fixtures helpful in your day-to-day. All right, challenge number 12. All right, this is very, very important right now. So this challenge comes from Corey Mattinen, and he's asking, how do you motivate without a deadline? So right now, when we're not doing shows, how do you make yourself do work? How do you better yourself in that time? It can be really, really difficult when you don't have someone breathing down your neck saying, we need this by Friday. So I have found it really helpful to internalize those goals that you normally would be given from someone else. So making personal goals that are actually achievable. So I have a checklist every day for things that I want to take care of every day. So it's, things like getting outside, but also learning something. And one of those things is just either learning something or working on a project that has to do with my job. So it's also self-affirming because it reminds me that I am pretty good at my job and I love my job and that I want to keep doing it when this is all over. And so that is my most important thing, is just keeping myself on those checklists and saying, have I done this today? Have I done this today? It's also important to just vary your tasks and change it up every day. So if you're doing something with After Effects one day, then you do something with MA the next day, then you do something with Vectorworks the next day, just changing it up. I also think that it can be really important to take advantage of the opportunities like this. So if you have an opportunity to do a challenge or do a project that someone else that doesn't necessarily pay, but can help you in your career and also just help you become motivated again and give you a purpose, it can be really, really helpful. One of the things that I have done on this and kept myself motivated by doing is it can be hard to have a creative outlet on something like this, and because I normally have that creative outlet of just throwing colors and lights, I don't have that right now, and so I have been creating art. So obviously I made this cute little wheel, but I also made this fun little thread wall behind me that is a copycat of an artist named Gabriel Daw. So things like that can help just at least give you an outlet for your creativity. And it is important to do that because we are artists and we want to maintain that artistic juice that's flowing. All right, fun fact. Fun fact number 3. Did you know? So if you've heard the term SMPTE before when you're talking about time code, SMPTE actually stands for the Society of Motion Picture and Television Engineers. So film and TV are responsible for the time code that we use today, which it used to be, earlier on in the last century, it used to be handwritten numbers on reels that were then lined up and then cut in between and then put together. But over the years, they created different kinds of time codes to help line up audio with video, and that is what and it has now transferred over into our world. All right, challenge number 1. This challenge number one is also a very, very common challenge that we have all dealt with, every design forever has dealt with, and that's just budget. So everybody has been talking, or everyone that has designed a show has dealt with someone coming back to them and saying, oh, this is really nice, but it's too expensive. So a lot of the times that we are figuring out how to fit into budget, we're also figuring out how to maintain the integrity of a design that we really like. So when I was discussing this with my partner, one of the things that he said was creativity does not come from abundance, which I think is a really important thing to remember. So what can you as a designer do with a rig that is, say, 12 fixtures instead of a design that is 200 fixtures? How do you figure out which fixtures you need the most? So a lot of the time you have to talk to the artist and have that rapport with the artist and management and say, okay, what are the important things to you about this design? And so my example for this is my Sophia Tucker show that I did with a broken arm. And it was the first time that they had carried any production at all. And so they didn't really know what they wanted, except that they wanted a jungle. And so I created this mini jungle, this mini UV jungle for them. And so they wanted to have all of the scenery, all of the greenery, and they also wanted things to be lit up with UV because there are a lot of UV elements in it. And then they also have this book tree, what they call a book tree, in the middle of the show, and it is a bunch of MIDI triggers that is very, very central to their show. And so that was a big thing for them, was making sure that that is well lit all the time. And so I took that down. Okay, if that's the top of our priority list, then where do we go from there? And for a lot of this design, I really wanted this new light that had just come out, and it was the coolest thing, and everyone wanted it, and it's really expensive. And I had to kind of talk myself down off of that ledge for a while because there was just no way that it was going to fit into our budget. And the band kept wanting more and more fixtures, and so I had to keep talking down and saying, okay, well, these are the things that we need, but these are things that we can sub in that are a little bit more practical for our uses and also still will hit a lot of those check marks that you need. Something that can be really budget friendly is scenery. So you don't necessarily always need a bajillion fixtures for your show, but if you can have really interesting scenery that you can light with a few fixtures, it can be really budget friendly. So that's one of the things that we try to do here. Also, something that I'm sure that the video people or my video friends will be really sad about it, but a lot of the time, if you have a tight budget, you'll have to cut budget, or you'll have to cut video because it is the most expensive thing that that exists on tours that are this size, and it can be really, really challenging for your budget to have that video element in there. But then you can also, if the video is really important to the band, then you can also say, okay, how else can we achieve those same goals? Can we use a projector, or can we use Ceptrons, so you can use half of the number of pixels, but also make a more interesting design out of that and out of those pixels. Yeah, those are some good talking points on budget. All right, fun fact. Exciting fun fact. All right. I'm going to do my favorite one because I love it a lot. So, did you know that the size of theatrical gel sheets, so filter sheets, are the size of a standard baker's sheet? Because originally when they were made from gelatin, they were actually cast using baker's sheets. All right, it's going to be hard to get down there. All right, lighting fun facts. All right, did you know that dichroic filters that were often used in lighting fixtures to color the fixtures were originally developed in the 1950s by NASA, who used them for space visors and also for spacecraft windows. One more fun fact. Oh my gosh, I might have to cheat a little bit and move to one of the last couple challenges that we have. Ooh, this is an interesting one. So did you know that you get purple spots in front of your eyes after a bright flash of light because of the interaction of vitamin B and rhodopsin, which is a biological pigment found in the rods of your retinas. Rhodopsin is very sensitive to light, and so it helps you in lower light situations. But then when it is exposed to light, it photo-bleaches itself and takes about 30 minutes to regenerate. So you have those little spots in front of your eye. All right, I'm just going to cheat. I'm going to say that that's nice. We're close enough. All right. Challenge number 9. So challenge number 9 comes from Michelle Serrano. And she wants to know, when you're programming a show with specialty lights that have onboard effects or effect macros and color macros and things like that, how do you program with those when you know that you're going to be on festivals or on B, D, and D, and F, G rigs? So this picture is from the Jimmy Eat World show, the first Jimmy Eat World tour that I did, and I had taken over actually Michelle's show with Sarah Landau that they had designed and programmed, and it had a bunch of these linear fixtures, but the show had been a bit cannibalized over the years. It had started out with a bunch more a video element and a bunch of other things, and so by this point it was just down to a handful of fixtures. And so I was taking the show file from them, and it had a handful of these linear fixtures with a bunch of those onboard effects. And it was really challenging to go into other festivals and shows that was a big portion of the programming in those shows, but you can't rely on other fixtures to have similar effects. You can't rely on having these types of fixtures in festivals all the time anyway. And all of you who have programmed a show using something that has those onboard effects, you know that a lot of those fixtures don't have any semblance of the same kinds of setup in their profiles, and so it can be really hard to line up which effects do what and how they are controlled. So personally, I've tried not to use onboard effects at all in my programming. I know that a lot of the time, if you have a lot or a very small amount of programming time, it can be very beneficial to creating some cool looks. But I personally would actually create a more simple show to start the tour, and then once everything gets going, I would do more interesting things with full control of those pixels, because that is important to me. And I think that it can be a lot simpler to clone off of single pixels, because you could clone a single pixel over to a completely different picture and still maintain somewhat of the programming. But if you have those onboard effects, you might just be completely missing those options in general. I know that sometimes you're also going to be faced with a lack of universes or DMX capabilities, and so I try also to make that a non-issue in my tours. So if you can network and you know you have all of those universes, then you can have full control over all of your pixels, and you will be a happier camper when you have to go into those days where you are on a festival or you have a third of your rig and it's a fly date, so if someone else was providing it, and it makes it a lot easier to deal with that. How are we doing on time, guys? Are we okay?
Hey, Tess, it's Brad. You're just about where you wanted to be at the 10 minutes still. We've got a couple of questions getting ready, so maybe you can cover the next two. You want to cover the next two, or you want to jump
Yeah,
into the
let's go into questions. I like questions. I want to leave a little bit of time for questions.
Okay. We'll all wonder then what the other two were.
I know, we'll all wonder.
All right, the first question is asking, what are some ways to get an artist you've just started working with to trust you?
Oh, good question. I think a lot of it has to do with knowing what you're talking about. So if you have done, again, doing your homework and learning about the artist, learning what their vibe is like, learning what they have done in the past so that you know, as Rob Koenig was talking about this the other day, was learning what they've done in the past so that you know you're not going to repeat it, but also knowing where they're coming from a budgetary standpoint, knowing where they can be on a budgetary standpoint, so knowing how much fixtures cost or how much shows cost or how much scenic cost, things like that can be really, really helpful in getting that artist to trust you pretty quickly.
Okay, next question is asking, what's the best way to define the budget? By offering a lighting design with a price, or asking budget limit and then planning a show for this money?
So most shows will offer you, or will tell you the budget that they are looking to spend for the tour. So it definitely starts from their end. And I know some management is tricky and they say, oh, we don't really know where we are in budget, and then you create something beautiful that costs way too much money, and they come back and say, oh, that's too expensive, let's cut half of it. But usually it does come from that management and that artist, and then you have to work within those limitations. And sometimes you are going to have to deal with losing some elements of your show. If you have to understand that from a design standpoint, your designs are not always going to be realized, or realized at all, or realized to their full potential. And so you have to be not defensive about that and just be ready, like maybe with a plan B that might be a little bit cheaper, or with something that can help you get from where you start on that budget to down to where they want to be.
Okay, the next question is asking, what are some essential software programs that you suggest to learn beyond drafting plots?
The ones that drafting plots is very important for sure, and Vectorworks is a very good program to know, or the other ones with UA and all the other programs. But I also think that learning a 3D program can be really helpful, especially you'll see on a lot of the larger tours, the people who are pitching those designs to those artists, a lot of the time they are completely creating this 3D environment so that the art, and even on some of them, they are creating a virtual reality environment for that artist so that the artist can come in and look at their show from any seat in the house. And so it can be helpful to learn 3D programs as well. So I have spent some time recently on MA3D, which is free and easy to use. But also I've heard good things about Capture and Vision as well. And it's all about creating something that expresses your designs and your dreams for their show. So I definitely recommend those. I've been learning After Effects just from a video standpoint, and I think partially it's just very fun and interesting because it's a different side of things, but it also can be very helpful for creating video content. So those are some things that I have found that are helpful in my world.
Okay, next question is asking, what color were you disappointed to give up in a show when an artist requested you not use it, and what did you replace it with?
Ooh. I mean, white is definitely the hardest one that I've come across. Most of the artists I've been fortunate enough to not have to deal with color limitations. I wanted a show that the artist, I was a venue lighting director, and the artist came in and said, there is no way that you can use blue in any of your lights. It is very, very important. It is a matter of life and death that you do not use any blue in your show. And that was really a scary thing to hear from somebody who you're doing their lights for, but also a very, very challenging show. And I didn't necessarily replace that with anything. I tried to stay away from blue shades as well, so I took away most of my purple shades. But it's just, okay, here's your range. Are you going from white to amber to red to magenta, and just figuring out how else to make that feeling that you would if you were using that color.
Okay, next question is asking, apart from other lighting designs, what inspires you as a designer?
Ooh, I love art. As you can see, I love art a lot, and I go to a lot of art museums on days off. It is one of my favorite things to do, and I have found that can be really, really inspiring as well. And especially, like, I went to an art museum a few months ago, right before this all started, and it was a light museum, and it was incredible. And some of the things that I saw there were things that I really, really wanted to just take straight into designs and start working with immediately. So that is my biggest point of inspiration, for sure.
Okay, next question is asking, many of your examples did not make use of video walls. Is this coincidental, or do you try to avoid video walls in your designs?
Probably most of it is coincidental. I don't have as much of a video background as I would probably like to, but it also probably has a lot to do with the fact that I am from a theatrical background farm, and I really like soft goods, and I really like playing with scenic elements. So I would absolutely be interested in putting more video into my designs, but I do think that putting video into a design needs to be more creative than just having a video wall. So I prefer to use things like Ceptrons and to create those kinds of looks, because I think it is much more interesting to look at.
Okay, next question. If you can say, what is the smallest and largest budget you've worked with for your design?
It's a tricky question, because it depends on what the band wants to spend per week on gear, as well as what they want to spend on designs. I mean, I have definitely, some of these shows have been, they want to spend $1,000 a week on gear, which is pretty minimal for lighting gear. But I have been lucky enough to not actually have to have a conversation of budget once in my life, and it was amazing. It was just, here, create this show that we want and do whatever you need to, and they didn't come back and say it was too expensive. And I know that this is a unicorn in the industry, because it had never happened, but that was definitely obviously the biggest budget was, you have no budget.
All right, so we have a question, and he wanted to mention that this is from Jeremy Scanlon. Where was your favorite venue or location you set up?
Ooh, I have a lot of favorite venues, and mostly it's just, my favorite venues are a lot of the old theaters that I get to tour in the United States. So one of the cooler things about working with Ben Folds is that he frequently is doing these amazing theaters that have been renovated and are just gorgeous. And I also did a tour with So You Think You Can Dance a couple of years ago, and it was the same thing. It's just beautiful theaters every single day. And it was a big change from doing, dirty rock clubs or arenas or amphitheaters, because it was just, like, the architecture was beautiful, and it was just it was very nice to work with those crews as well. And so those are definitely, I'm not going to pinpoint one, but I love working with those.
Next question is asking, can you provide us with one more fun fact, please?
Sure, okay. Let's find a good one. Did you know that the term limelight comes from the 1830s, when lighting fixtures used a small block of calcium oxide, which was also known as quicklime, placed in front of a reflector and heated up, and it became incandescent from that point.
Okay, it looks like that's it for questions. So I wanted to thank you so much, Tess, for presenting. This was a super unique way of doing this webinar. I loved it. It was really fun. And I wanted to thank everyone who attended. Before we sign off, I wanted to quickly share 3 links with all of you in the chat box. These are links that people frequently ask for, so I'm just going to go ahead and share them with you now. The first one is going to be a link to our Harmon Professional University. So that is going to give you access to all of our upcoming certifications. We've got thousands of hours of curriculum on there and additional content. So there's a registration page in there for you to sign up to get access. And then the second link is to our playlist on YouTube, where all of these webinars go after we record them. So this one that you were on today, you can go back and watch it if you go out to that link. And then the third link I sent you is to our full calendar of upcoming webinars. So thank you so much for attending, and I hope everybody has a fabulous weekend. Thanks, Tess.
Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Tess.
Thanks, Tess. Bye.
Bye, guys.